On July 25th, 2026, the European Union unveiled its 21st sanctions package against Russia, and most headlines described it as another major escalation against Moscow. Major news outlets portrayed it as Brussels tightening the pressure with more sanctions and additional blacklisted vessels, making it appear like Europe was becoming tougher than ever. But buried deep inside the legal text is a single clause that completely changes the picture. That clause allows EU member states to sell Russian oil seized from sanctioned tankers directly into their own domestic markets. Think about that for a second. A sanctions package designed to reduce dependence on Russian energy also creates a legal mechanism that allows Russian oil to continue entering Europe under different circumstances. And that's only the beginning. Dig deeper, and you find the United States reportedly considering new military options against Iran, Iran preparing a fresh list of strategic targets inside Israel, Russia benefiting from higher global energy prices without expanding its military operations, and Europe caught between maintaining sanctions and keeping its economy supplied with enough energy. Today we're going to connect all of these developments into one larger picture. Before looking at the facts, it's useful to understand a pattern that explains almost everything happening right now. Imagine solving one problem only to create an even bigger one. Every decision appears logical in the short term, but every solution creates another crisis that demands another response, until the entire system begins working against itself. That's the pattern I call the self-destroying loop. Here's how it unfolds. The United States launches military action against Iran with the objective of limiting Iran's regional influence and protecting long-term strategic interests. Iran responds by threatening the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important energy choke points, causing global oil prices to surge almost immediately. Europe, already struggling with expensive energy after reducing its dependence on Russian supplies, suddenly faces another major supply shock. European economies need oil. Russia still has oil, and despite sanctions, Europe continues searching for ways to access Russian energy. Ukraine then targets Russian energy infrastructure. Moscow responds by restricting fuel exports even further. Global supplies tighten again. Europe becomes even more desperate for energy, and the entire cycle repeats itself. Each attempt to weaken Russia or Iran creates new incentives that ultimately increase dependence on Russian resources. Instead of breaking the cycle, every move strengthens it. Now, let's examine what the 21st sanctions package actually changes. At first glance, Package 21 looks aggressive. More than 50 additional vessels were added to the sanctions list, while existing price restrictions remained in place, sending the political message that Europe continues increasing pressure on Moscow. But the legal language tells a much more complicated story. The new provisions allow member states to sell Russian oil seized from sanctioned vessels into their own domestic markets. In practice, that creates a legal pathway for Russian oil to continue reaching European consumers under specific circumstances. Imagine someone announcing they've completely stopped eating sugar, but then adding, "except when someone gives it to me for free." Technically, they might argue they're following the rules, but in reality, their behavior hasn't changed very much. Many analysts describe this as pragmatic policymaking. European governments still want to pressure Russia politically, but at the same time, they must prevent energy shortages at home. Those two objectives increasingly collide. Even more interesting is what happened before Package 21 even existed. Between January and April 2026, European countries imported roughly $3 billion worth of liquefied natural gas from Russia's Yamal Arctic project. According to available figures, Europe accounted for almost the entire output of that project during the same period. That means Russian energy was already flowing into Europe well before the newest sanctions package became law. Package 21 didn't necessarily create a new reality. Instead, critics argue, it simply provided additional legal cover for practices that were already taking place behind the scenes. One recent incident perfectly demonstrates how complicated this conflict has become. A tanker chartered by Chevron was transporting Kazakh crude through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium route across the Black Sea. This route is strategically important because it was specifically developed to reduce Europe's dependence on Russian oil and represents one of the main alternatives to Russian energy exports. During the voyage, the tanker was struck by a Ukrainian drone. Think about the implications. An American company's tanker carrying non-Russian oil along an alternative supply route was hit by one of America's closest military partners. Reports indicate Washington then had to urge Kyiv to avoid targeting ships unrelated to Russian energy exports. The situation highlights just how complicated the conflict has become. The United States is attempting to secure alternative energy supplies for Europe, while actions taken within the broader conflict risk disrupting those very alternatives. Once again, the self-destroying loop continues. Another major development came from Iran's foreign ministry following European criticism regarding human rights. Iranian officials responded with unusually strong language, arguing that Europe cannot present itself as a defender of human rights while supporting military operations that result in civilian casualties inside Iran. One particular phrase attracted international attention. Iranian officials referenced the banality of evil, a concept introduced by philosopher Hannah Arendt, while examining how bureaucratic systems can enable harmful actions through routine procedures rather than personal hatred. By invoking that concept, Iran attempted to frame European institutions as organizations that publicly defend humanitarian values while remaining silent on military actions affecting Iranian civilians. Whether one agrees with that comparison or not, the rhetorical impact is significant. Rather than debating military strategy, Iran shifted the discussion toward Europe's credibility. Many countries outside the Western alliance are watching these exchanges closely because, for them, questions about consistency and international standards matter almost as much as military developments themselves. Despite the attention focused on Washington and Tehran, another country may actually be benefiting the most from everything happening: Russia. Rising oil prices generate additional revenue without requiring Moscow to expand military operations in the Middle East. While other countries absorb political and military costs, Russia benefits from tighter global energy markets. Iran itself reportedly earned substantial oil revenue during the conflict, despite sanctions and military pressure. If Iran could continue exporting energy under those conditions, it raises an important question. How much additional revenue is Russia earning while avoiding direct involvement altogether? Russia later announced an extension of restrictions on fuel exports through the end of 2026. The immediate effect is reduced global supply. Lower supply generally supports higher prices. Higher prices increase Russia's export revenues, and Europe then faces even greater pressure to secure reliable energy sources. Once again, the cycle reinforces itself. One of the most disputed stories involves Kuwait. Reports suggested that military operations against Iran had been launched from facilities connected to Kuwait, but Kuwaiti officials strongly rejected those claims, insisting that Kuwait had never authorized attacks against Iran from its territory. However, the issue becomes more complicated because the United States maintains military bases inside Kuwait. Think of it like renting part of a property. The owner controls the land, while the tenant controls certain activities inside the rented space. Supporters of Kuwait's position argue that the government cannot automatically be held responsible for every military decision made by foreign forces stationed there. Iran, however, sees little distinction. From Tehran's perspective, any territory hosting American military operations becomes part of the conflict, regardless of local political approval. That creates difficult questions for countries attempting to remain neutral while simultaneously hosting major foreign military installations. Looking across all of these developments, a common pattern begins to emerge. Europe wants to sanction Russia while avoiding economic damage. The United States wants to pressure Iran without triggering a wider regional war. Iran wants to deter future attacks while strengthening its diplomatic position. Russia benefits from rising energy prices without opening a new front. Each actor pursues its own objectives, yet the outcome repeatedly produces unintended consequences for everyone involved. And that's exactly why understanding the self-destroying loop matters, because every new decision may solve one immediate problem while quietly creating the next crisis. The argument from the other side deserves serious consideration before reaching any conclusions. Supporters of the current Western strategy argue that Package 21 is still a genuine sanctions package. More vessels have been blacklisted, restrictions remain in force, and Russia continues facing significant economic pressure compared with previous years. They also argue that Europe has little choice. Governments must balance national security with economic stability, because keeping industries running and preventing another energy crisis requires flexibility. From this perspective, limited exceptions don't necessarily mean sanctions have failed. Supporters of U.S. policy also argue that military operations have significantly weakened Iran's capabilities. Iran has suffered infrastructure damage, military assets have been targeted, and strategically, Washington believes it has reduced Iran's ability to threaten regional stability. Those arguments deserve consideration, but critics believe they leave several important questions unanswered. If Europe continues importing Russian energy through indirect mechanisms, is the overall pressure on Moscow really increasing? And if military action creates higher oil prices that ultimately strengthen Russia's economy, who benefits in the long run? Those questions remain at the center of the debate. Officially, Washington has described the recent slowdown in military operations as an opportunity for diplomacy. Negotiations reportedly continue through regional intermediaries, making the current situation appear like a positive diplomatic development. However, some reports suggest another explanation. According to multiple accounts, U.S. officials have expressed concerns about the availability of Patriot missile interceptors after weeks of sustained operations. If accurate, that would mean the current pause reflects logistical realities as much as diplomatic intentions. Military campaigns depend on supplies. Even the world's strongest armed forces must carefully manage inventories, and if defensive systems require replenishment, operational planning naturally changes. That doesn't necessarily mean diplomacy is impossible, but it suggests military capability and political messaging may be moving together. Behind the scenes, several strategic options reportedly remain under discussion. One option involves expanding military pressure, while another emphasizes negotiations, and each carries significant risks. Escalation could widen the conflict, while diplomacy could be viewed as weakness by regional opponents. Neither path offers an easy solution. Public statements often focus on the damage already inflicted on Iran. Far less attention is given to the capabilities that reportedly remain. Some intelligence assessments cited in media reports suggest Iran still retains a substantial portion of its missile program despite months of military pressure. Satellite imagery has reportedly shown continued reconstruction of missile and drone infrastructure. If those reports are accurate, they suggest Iran is prepared for a prolonged conflict rather than a short campaign. Modern warfare increasingly favors adaptation. Facilities can be dispersed, production can be relocated, and technology can evolve faster than many expect. Iran has also reportedly expanded its use of drones alongside missile forces. That combination creates a serious challenge for modern air defense systems. Large numbers of inexpensive drones can force defenders to expend costly interceptor missiles. Even if every drone is destroyed, the defending side still pays a significant financial and logistical price. That imbalance has become one of the defining characteristics of modern warfare. One proposal receiving growing attention involves a large-scale special operations mission against Iranian nuclear facilities. Instead of relying solely on airstrikes, the concept would involve physically securing sensitive sites and removing enriched nuclear material. Military analysts describe such an operation as extraordinarily difficult. The facilities are heavily fortified, many are located deep underground, and any mission would require thousands of personnel providing security, engineering support, logistics, and extraction capabilities. Reports also suggest Iran anticipated this possibility long ago. Several facilities have reportedly been reinforced and prepared against potential raids. If true, any operation would face not only physical defenses, but also carefully planned countermeasures. The challenge illustrates a broader reality. As strategic options become more limited, every remaining choice becomes increasingly risky. Perhaps the most serious concern involves the possibility of automatic escalation. According to reports cited in the original script, Iranian sources claim a new target list has been prepared for strategic infrastructure inside Israel. The reported objective extends beyond military facilities and focuses on infrastructure considered difficult to repair quickly. Whether those claims are accurate or not, the strategic message is clear. Iran wants potential adversaries to understand that any major strike could trigger a much broader regional response. The concern isn't simply another exchange of missiles. It's the possibility that multiple regional actors become involved simultaneously, dramatically increasing uncertainty. Wars often expand not because anyone originally intended them to, but because every response creates pressure for another. History offers many examples of conflicts growing far beyond their original objectives. Military operations are only one side of this confrontation. The legal and diplomatic arena has become equally important. Iran has increasingly relied on international institutions to challenge Western policy. Following attacks on Iranian commercial vessels, Tehran argued that international law should apply consistently regardless of which country is responsible. Iran also criticized international organizations for condemning certain actions while remaining silent on others. Whether those criticisms are accepted internationally is another question. Strategically, however, they serve an important purpose. Iran is attempting to influence countries across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East by portraying international institutions as selective rather than neutral. For many governments outside the traditional Western alliance, those arguments resonate. International credibility increasingly depends not only on military power, but also on perceptions of fairness. Winning the narrative has become almost as important as winning on the battlefield. Ultimately, this story extends beyond sanctions, oil shipments, or individual military operations. At its core lies the international financial system. For decades, American influence has rested not only on military strength, but also on the central role of the U.S. dollar in global energy markets. That system depends heavily on alliances, stable trade routes, and confidence in existing international institutions. Recent events suggest growing pressure on each of those pillars. European governments continue searching for alternative energy arrangements. Countries across the global south increasingly seek greater strategic independence. Regional organizations are expanding cooperation outside traditional Western structures. None of these developments alone transforms the global system, but together they point toward gradual change. Ironically, policies designed to strengthen the existing order may sometimes encourage countries to search for alternatives instead. That represents the highest level of the self-destroying loop. Attempts to defend the system can unintentionally accelerate its transformation. As this situation develops, three indicators deserve close attention. First, monitor U.S. military logistics. If additional air defense systems are transferred into the Middle East, it could indicate preparations for renewed operations. Second, watch developments between Israel and Iran. Changes in official rhetoric regarding critical infrastructure may signal rising tensions. Finally, observe how international institutions respond to future incidents involving commercial shipping and regional conflicts. Those responses will influence how countries outside the Western alliance interpret the legitimacy of existing international rules. Stepping back, this story isn't simply about sanctions. It isn't only about oil, and it isn't solely about military operations. It's about how economic pressure, energy security, diplomacy, and military strategy have become tightly interconnected. Europe seeks to weaken Russia while protecting its own economy. The United States aims to deter Iran without triggering a larger regional conflict. Iran attempts to raise the costs of future attacks while expanding diplomatic support. Russia benefits from tighter energy markets without directly entering the conflict. Every major player pursues rational objectives, yet the interaction between those objectives often produces unexpected outcomes. That's what makes this situation so difficult to predict. In international politics, success isn't determined only by intentions. It's determined by consequences. And sometimes those consequences move in directions that none of the major players originally planned. As these developments continue to unfold, the most important question may not be who appears strongest today. Instead, it's whether the strategies being pursued are actually moving each side closer to its long-term goals, or quietly pushing everyone deeper into the same self-destroying loop. I'll see you in the next one.